All right, so let's bring on Mouthy. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, if you want to introduce yourself, tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and where people can find you.
Yeah, I'm Mouthy Infidel. I have a YouTube channel called Mouthy Infidel. I'm generally pretty far to the left. So yeah, I guess that's about it.
All right, so yeah, we are going to be debating veganism tonight, so this should be fun. So I guess, you guys know the drill. We can give opening statements, can be little as 1 minute, no longer than 5, about the topic and your stance. After that, we'll open up the floor. For those of you in the audience, you guys can ask questions throughout the debate. I will be jotting them down. Just tag politically provoked, who your question is addressed to. And after we do our questions, we will do closing statements and final thoughts. So why don't we get started with opening statements. Rachel, you want to go first? You're muted.
Sorry, I'm so bad at remembering to unmute myself. Mouthy and I agreed to debate veganism, but we're specifically debating the ethics of it, I believe is what we agreed on, which he even kind of said, like, we could really get into some deeply philosophical out in the weeds territory. So I think we're going to try not to do that, but we'll see if we can do that. And what I'm going to say about veganism from a moral or ethical perspective is that, well, a lot of people probably don't know, but I actually kind of made a name for myself before I did all this. About 10 years ago, arguing dietary stuff. So I was into bodybuilding and diets and nutrition and all of the big nutrition gurus that like to argue and debate online. I was kind of in that whole scene for years. So I do have like a pretty solid background on the nutrition aspect, but if we're just going to talk about the ethics or the morality of it, I think that's actually a really cool spin on the topic that you don't always hear, because there is a very religious background to veganism. In fact, if you go back to the history of it, it started, probably 500 years BC at least, maybe further back than that, with things like Hinduism, Buddhism, and then the Pythagoreans were some type of vegetarian vegan. The philosophers disagree a little bit on how strict they were, but they were supposed to be at least vegetarian. So it started as more of a religious thing and more of a religious purpose. And in the 20th century, it has gotten a big political push behind it. So I think a lot of people might think veganism came out of like science or nutrition first, and now the left has kind of adopted it as like a moral, ethical stance. It's actually the other way around. But my position on it is that if your goal is to limit suffering and do something with your diet and food production that's going to be the best overall for humans and animals, veganism is actually not the best choice. It's actually one of the worst choices. I wouldn't say it's the worst, but it's definitely not the best. You could do sustainable agriculture. You could do grazing type of farming where you rotate grazing in grasslands. In fact, that's a really big, there's a big trend going that way with people like the Savory Institute. If you have ever seen the documentary Sacred Cow, that's a fantastic one about this subject that goes over the fact that if you're concerned about things like feeding the planet, limiting animal abuse or animal suffering, and greenhouse gases and climate change and all that stuff, that actually we need to replenish topsoil, bring back the grasslands, and that grazing animals are a big part of the ecosystem, and we really can't fix things without them. Furthermore, there is no such thing as a zero impact diet, which I'm pretty sure Mouthy Infidel knows. He's a pretty smart kid. So there is no way you can eat that absolutely nothing else will have to die in order for you to eat. So we'll hear what his stance is and what he thinks the best way is to do things. But I would say, as a person that grew up on farms, in farms, I've done homesteading myself. I've raised chickens, goats, cows, never pigs because they're a big pain in the butt. But I have raised animals. I've worked on dairy farms when I was a teenager. So I'm very familiar with this. I've done it myself. I'm not just reading books about it and giving you my opinion. I've actually raised animals, slaughtered them. In fact, I have 2 freezers down here in my basement filled with 2 cows and a pig that we buy from our neighbors every year. We get a lot of our dairy and cheese and all of that from our Amish neighbors who produce it and sell it. So there's definitely a responsible, ethical way to use animal products that's actually better for the animals.
All right. So, Mouthy.
Okay, so yeah, so certainly I agree there's no such thing as a zero impact diet. Even on a vegan diet, there's going to be things like crop deaths, these sorts of things. My concern is more eliminating that harm, which is, I guess, unnecessary. There's some talk about the idea that it's actually better for the animals to support farms that are, local farms, or maybe not, I guess, factory farms or something like that. I'm curious to see what or I'd be curious to know, I guess, what the justification for that claim is, because so my general argument with regards to veganism is, when it comes to whether or not we should ascribe moral value to animals, or how much, right? Presumably, we wouldn't say that it's okay to farm humans and kill humans, or presumably we wouldn't say it's okay to go hunt humans and then eat humans, etc. So if you're going to hold that position, then you're going to need some sort of a meaningful symmetry breaker between humans and animals, which gives us moral justification in doing things to animals which would not be permissible to do to humans. So specifically, you would have to name some feature of animals that is present, that if present in humans would suddenly make it okay to do what we do to animals to humans. I don't think such a feature can be given. Well, I mean, such a feature could be given, but inevitably, if you give such a feature, you're going to have to run into some pretty weird moral consequences, which I guess we could explore. And yeah, so finally, I guess one thing to note at the outset is that this could get into really deep philosophical territory, or we might just not be able to get that far at all, because I guess metaethically speaking, I consider myself to be a moral anti-realist, so I don't think there is any such thing as moral truth or something like this. So you could stake out a position that's entirely consistent, that justifies killing animals. And I couldn't say that you're objectively wrong for holding that position. But what I will say is, if you want to consistently hold such a position, you're going to have to bite the bullet on some really weird conclusions. And I guess that's what I wanted to explore here. So.
Okay. So yeah, that's exactly where I was thinking we should start, which is, I know that you have said you're kind of more of a moral relativist. Would that be accurate?
I'm not sure if moral relativism has some like baggage and philosophical terms that I might not subscribe to, but broadly I would say that I don't believe in some sort of objective moral values. I think that our moral values are more or less just products of our subjective desires and psychological preferences.
Right. And so I've seen other vegan debates that they've never gotten past the meta-analyses of how we define ethics or morality. They'll go on for hours and never get past that. So I don't want to do that, but I guess we do have to kind of talk about the fact that, are you like a utilitarian?
I'm a what would be called a threshold deontologist in terms of my normative ethics. So I guess to cash that out a little bit, because it's not a very like famous theory or whatever. The basic idea is that you place some moral value on the utility of beings, and you also place some moral value on deontic rights. So like the right to life, the right to not, have your bodily autonomy infringed upon, etc. And so the basic idea is that the moral value of an action is going to be determined by those two different considerations being weighed against each other. So whereas a utilitarian would say that, violating someone's rights is always morally justified if it produces positive utility, I would say that violating someone's rights, even if it produces net positive utility, is still going to be immoral. But there's a certain threshold of utility at which point it would become morally permissible to violate someone's rights. So, like, for example, if I had to violate your right, someone's right to life and kill them in order to prevent like 50,000 people from dying or something like that, then I think it would be a threshold has been met at which point the rights violation is morally permissible. So yeah, that's my general framework.
Okay, and then I'm going to have a completely different framework, which, being a Christian, there's nothing I can really do from my worldview to not include that, because that's what I base my worldview and my morality on. So we're both kind of stuck there. But I think maybe where we could kind of parse things out might be something like, so if you think that, when you said you might have to bite the bullet on some weird stuff, I'm guessing you're kind of thinking like, where do we draw this line of what's okay to kill and eat and what's not okay to kill and eat, and why? Mm-hmm. So I guess where I would start with that is just by asking you, do you think that there are any animals that we're allowed to kill, or like, where do you draw the line? Like, I know some people feel like I have a best friend actually who's a vegan, and we've gone rounds about this a lot together. And she feels more like if it's at least as intelligent as her pet, personally for her, that's where she draws the line and won't eat that thing. But even she doesn't even really eat chickens. So I feel like she actually takes it a little further than she thinks she does. But do you have like a line that you draw, and where would that be?
Yeah, so the line isn't going to be at some level of intelligence. The line is going to be at just the existence of sentience, like having conscious experience, being able to, experience things, I guess, just broadly speaking. And there are cases, I guess, to specify where it would be okay to kill an animal. So, if you're being attacked by an animal or something and you have to kill the animal in order to save your own life or something like that, then in that case, I think it's morally permissible. But in terms of what we do to animals, farming them, hunting them, raising them to be slaughtered and eaten, etc. The question that I always ask is just, presumably you wouldn't be okay with it if we did this to humans. So what actual feature is it that's true of animals that, if true of humans, would suddenly make it okay to do that to humans?
Okay, that makes sense. Well, at the current time, about 14% of the world is vegan. In the United States, it's only about 3.5%, I think, last time I checked. So if 96.5% of the country is eating meat, and you wanted to flip that around, I would say that the onus would kind of be on you to give us really good reasons as to why, because that's a huge switch to make. It's a huge change to make. It would have economic implications. It would have ecological implications. It would have health implications. It would have trade implications. This would be a massive thing. And I know that generally the left likes to incrementally do things, which is fine, but it's still a really big change to make to the way that we've done things for all of human history. I mean, you have hunter-gatherer tribes to this day who survive mainly off of hunting and foraging and don't do any agricultural monocropping or anything like that. So if we want to take what we've always done as far as eating animals for all of human history, and you want to change it now, I feel like you'd have to have a pretty strong case as to why people should do that.
Yeah, so I guess I agree that there would be health changes, ecological changes, etc. We probably don't agree on what those are, but I kind of want to leave the ecological and health concerns on the sideline for the purposes of, I guess, discussing the morality of it. So I would say that when it comes to what we do to animals, I take it generally as a pretty uncontroversial premise that upon rational reflection, most human beings are going to say, if we have a being that is sentient, that can experience pleasure, that can experience pain, that can experience love and fear and a wide range of emotions, and has its own life, etc. If we want to, there has to be a good justification if we want to needlessly take the life of a sentient creature. So, like I said, my justification would just be that I don't think there's any meaningful symmetry breaker between humans and animals in terms of whether it would be okay to kill them or not. I don't think that there's any feature that I can name or that anybody can name that's true of animals that, if true of humans, would make us okay with farming and slaughtering and eating other humans. So yeah, that would be my justification, is just that it's immoral to needlessly take the life of a sentient creature.
Right. So where I would have to come from on that would be, number one, as a Christian, I believe that human beings are different because we are made in the likeness and image of God. If you don't believe that, you'll just dismiss that. But also animals, so farm animals specifically, the ones that we tend to eat, cows, goats, chickens. What is it that you think, outside of factory farming, this is another thing that I think we can kind of put to the side and agree on. I'm against factory farming in general. Me being from out in the middle of nowhere on these little family farms, it was a big deal in the 80s and 90s when I was a kid that all of the huge corporations were coming in and buying up all of the family-owned farmland. It's a big deal out where I live to have like a centennial farm or a bicentennial farm where you've got like a sign out in your property that says that the farm's been in your family for a century or 2 centuries. There's families that have lived on the same farm here for 100, over 200 years. And especially in my area, I'm in like one of the first settlements where I am in my state. So when these giant companies started coming in and buying up not even just one family's farm, but like 10 families' farms in a giant, area, and taking it all over and starting to do factory farming and monocropping, there was all kinds of lawsuits, there was protests, there was all kinds of fighting against that. So I'm with you on that. I don't think that that's good. Mainly the ethical reason I don't think that's good, aside from factory farming all being fairly barbaric and not healthy for people, with massive use of pesticides and antibiotic use in animals when they're being raised, and the horrible living conditions and things like that. Aside from that, it also took away from autonomy and sovereignty of people here to control our own food production, which is another like central moral stance that I take on this issue. I do not want 3 or 4 or 5 giant companies like Cargill and Monsanto and Tyson Foods to control the entire food production for this whole country or even for the whole world. That would be a really horrible thing that once that happened, you could not get back from it. So if those companies did something bad or unethical or unhealthy, or if they screwed up in any way, there wouldn't be a whole lot you could do about it. That was actually one of the ways that they controlled things, like during the Holodomor and in Germany after World War II, was to control food supplies and starve people out. So I'm just generally against top-down control of food. I don't want them legislating what I can eat, what I can raise on my own property, things like that. But as far as just how ethical is it to kill an animal if you don't need to? Well, I do think that from a health standpoint, we do need to. We see really terrible nutritional deficiencies in infants. And I know we were trying not to get into that, but veganism for babies and young children is extremely detrimental to like brain development, dental health, all measures of health. Vegan moms have lower birth weight babies and things like that. So it is a moral thing. It's one thing to say we shouldn't kill animals because we don't need to, but if we don't do that, how do we make up for the nutritional deficits? How do we make up for the fact that you have to get way more calories just to get a smaller amount of nutrients and things like that? But furthermore, on that point, I know I'm kind of putting a lot of points in here, but I just have one more and then I'll let you respond. If you say you're pro-abortion at any age, I mean, a 20-week fetus is a sentient life, is it not? Isn't it worth just as much as a chicken or even a baby cow? And how would you say that killing one is okay, but killing the other is not?
Yeah, so there's a few things there. So firstly, it seemed like your answer to my question about, what feature is true of humans that if true, or what feature is true of animals that if true of humans would make it okay to raise and kill and eat them. It seemed like your answer was that humans are made in the image of God. And forgive me, I'm not very familiar with theology, so there might just be some really clear-cut answer I'm not understanding. But I feel like the question then just gets pushed back to, okay, well, what feature is true of animals that, if true of humans, would suddenly make it such that you no longer believe that we were made in the image of God? Is it our higher intelligence or something like this? So that would be one question. And the other issue is the issue about health. I agree. I don't want to get too much into the health aspect because I haven't studied much up on the health aspect. I was more so just coming to debate the ethics. But I do know that it does seem that most of the reputable health authorities generally take the position that there is no major health detriments to being vegan. So, for example, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has cited studies claiming that a plant-based diet has been shown to be healthy and nutritionally adequate for all stages of life, including pregnancy and infancy, which is a direct quote. And I guess even if I wanted to grant that, okay, well, there are certain people who it seriously will cause huge issues, like maybe children and pregnant people, I could even grant that. And then I would say, okay, well, what about the people who don't necessarily need to eat animals? Would it still be morally justified for them to eat animals? So if you wanted to have the conversation on that grounds, I would be perfectly happy to discuss the ethics of that. In terms of the abortion issue, I actually got a lot of flack recently on Twitter for being relatively pro-life. I'm not convinced that abortion should be illegal. But I think it probably is usually immoral because I believe a sentient obtains fetus somewhere around 6 to 7 months, 6 to 7 weeks. And once a fetus has attained sentience, I think it has moral value and therefore a right to life. And so generally probably shouldn't kill it. I'm not sure about the legality, but that's more of a pragmatic issue. But yeah, so I guess like the main thing I just wanted to focus on is the first thing, which seemed, I guess, most relevant to the ethical track, which is like, what feature is it that's true of animals that, if true of humans, would make it so that we're no longer made in the image of God? Or like, what's the symmetry breaker there?
Sure. So from a Christian perspective, it's something called nous, N-O-U-S. That is our the capacity that we have given to us by God that makes us different from animals. It means that we have the capacity for reason and logic, and that we also have the capacity for emotion, and we can combine the two to make decisions, to interpret the world around us. So that would be one thing. But the other thing is that animals are actually here for us, to serve us. It doesn't mean we should abuse them or treat them badly. We have to be good stewards of, what God has given us. That's for sure. But I mean, cows and chickens would not exist if they weren't for food purposes. They were domesticated for the purpose of eating. And beyond that, if you wanted to say it's not moral for people to eat animals, is it moral for animals to eat other animals? Because as someone who's raised chickens, let me tell you, chickens are absolutely vicious and brutal to other chickens. They will peck each other to death. If they are trying to dominate one another, they will pluck each other's feathers off and until one of them is dead. Chickens are very rapey. Sorry to tell you, everybody. These are the things that I think a lot of people who grow up in big cities are very disconnected from and don't have a lot of experience with. I grew up deer hunting. That was literally one of the ways my family sustained ourselves. We'd get a couple of deer in the fall, and that would get us through the winter. I mean, it's still like that out here. It's not that way in big cities. When I moved to a big city in my 20s and started working at a salon there, and I told the girls I was working with about hunting, they were like horrified. They were like, oh my God, why would you kill an animal when you can just go to the store and buy a hamburger? They didn't even understand where the food came from. So I think it's a little bit of a worldview difference in that way. For instance, if you wanted to make the argument that we can't kill animals, then you'd have to get rid of roads and cars. I have probably dozens of dead deer on my road every year. I have raccoons, I have rabbits we got roadkill out here like crazy because we're out in the woods and people drive cars and they hit animals and run them over and they die. I have barn cats that keep all the mice out of my barn, and They do not do as well as the cats that are in my house. So to the extent that I keep animals and take care of them and shepherd them and steward them, they actually do a lot better. So my argument is actually that ethical raising of animals for the purpose of food gives the animals a purpose to exist in the first place. I think that you said if we stop eating them, then we stop breeding them, so they don't need to exist and they never need to live at all. Why not give them a nice life, where they get to roam around and graze on grass and have a nice cow life until it's time to go to the slaughterhouse, and then they are ethically euthanized and slaughtered at that point. And there are ways to do that where the animal doesn't feel anything or know what's going on. I know everybody's seen the horror of slaughterhouses, which is why we don't buy our meat from there. I mean, there's multiple reasons. There's health reasons, and we want to support our neighbors and our friends who raise animals. And we keep chickens so that we can have eggs and things like that. And my chickens get treated better than a lot of people's house pets. They are babied all the time and taken really good care of. So, I mean, I don't think there's an ethical reason not to kill them and use them for food. For instance, lions kill things and eat them for food. You might say that they're not as intelligent as we are, so they can't morally discern right or wrong, so maybe it's okay. But what I'm saying is creation as it exists, whether you're Christian or not, it's an ecosystem and it's a circle of life, and everybody depends on everybody else for food. Everything that lives, something else has to die for that thing to live. And humans are not exceptions to that. Everybody thinks that because we're in big cities now and we have technology that like we're different, but we're not. We're absolutely part of the ecosystem. We are apex predators. You wouldn't ask lions to stop eating gazelles because it's morally wrong and they could just like eat grass or something. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, yeah, so there's a lot there, I guess. So I'll try to address all of that I had written down, and then maybe if you want, we could focus on one specific thing that if you want to, if there's anything that you particularly want to focus on. So firstly, it seems like the trait that you gave me that I think it was your symmetry breaker between it being okay to kill animals, but it not being okay to kill humans, was the fact that humans are capable of reasoning and logic, and we're capable of emotion. And so I think certainly a lot of animals are capable of emotion. So I don't know if that actually is a feature that's true of humans that's not true of animals, right? Animals can feel pleasure, animals can feel pain, animals can experience a lot of emotions. And in fact, if they couldn't, I wouldn't say it's unethical, right? I don't think killing plants is unethical, specifically because plants don't have brains or central nervous systems. They can't experience things like emotion or pleasure or pain or any of these things, right? Now, when it comes to reason and logical processes, I would say that that's not the most satisfying symmetry breaker, just in the sense that I can certainly point to humans who are severely mentally disabled, who have not any more of a capacity for reason and logic than your average chicken or your average cow or pig or something like this. There are human beings who are just severely disabled. Now, presumably, just because those humans are severely disabled and they're not as intelligent as we are, or as the general population is, certainly we wouldn't say that that's ethical justification that we could slaughter those types of disabled humans and eat them. Another thing that you brought up was this idea that animals are here for us. Well, I'm not sure if that provides any okay, so I guess you meant like in a biblical sense, like animals were put here for us, right? Well, I feel like even if I granted that, right, that God put animals on the earth for humans to enjoy them, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to, or that it's ethical to enjoy them specifically by hunting them and killing them and eating them and farming them and slaughtering them, right? Especially when I don't think we need to do this. You talk about, you mentioned a couple times how, animals like cows and chickens, these animals wouldn't even exist if we didn't breed them to eat them. Now, that's not exactly true. They wouldn't exist in the exact way that they currently do. So we have selectively breeded animals like cows and chickens to have certain traits. Like, for example, we've selectively breeded cows to produce abnormal amounts of milk. We've selectively breeded chickens to produce abnormal amounts of eggs. And we've selectively bred them to make them more profitable, to make them produce more food. Now, if we stopped farming them, certainly these kinds of chickens and cows wouldn't exist, because they would no longer be existing purely for the purposes of being slaughtered and eaten. But that doesn't mean that there's no such thing as a natural cow or a natural chicken, which would exist. And in fact, more of them would exist if we stopped using land to farm animals and kill them, and instead allowed that land to give rise to more natural species of animals. You also mentioned, you asked this question of, is it moral for animals to eat other animals or, kill other animals? And I would say that that's a bit of a weird issue, because I don't think animals like lions, for example, firstly, I don't think they have moral agency, and I think we do have moral agency. And secondly, I think that lions literally need to kill other animals in order to survive, whereas we don't. We can survive on a plant-based diet, and so any animals that we kill, we're killing unnecessarily, and we have the moral agents to choose not to kill them, whereas lion doesn't. So you also mentioned the idea of, well, we need to kill animals in order to have roads and stuff like that. And certainly that's true, right? It's true that a certain amount of animal deaths are necessary for civilization to exist, for roads to exist, for plants to exist. If I were to say that we should never do anything to kill any animals, I would have to say that we have to just be anprims and just ditch the idea of civilization. But I'm not going to say that, but I don't think I have to say that. I think I can pretty easily say that I'm okay with a certain amount of animal deaths that are necessary for civilization to function, but that doesn't mean that I think it's ethical to cause unnecessary animal deaths that occur purely for the purposes of our pleasure and our taste buds, that by no means need to die in order for things to function. So I guess another thing that you brought up was the idea of if we stopped breeding animals, they just wouldn't exist, and wouldn't we rather have them exist as opposed to having them not exist? Well, again, this is just going to come back to the issue that I brought up earlier, which is presumably we wouldn't say that it's okay for me to breed a human, have a child, give them a good life, and then at the age of 10, kill that human and eat them. Presumably we wouldn't say that's okay because a human has a right to life. And I don't think I've been given a persuasive enough feature that's true of my potential son that is not true of animals, that makes it okay for me to eat my son, or that makes it okay for me to eat animals, but wouldn't make it okay for me to eat my son if I had given him a good life prior to that. I also want to bring up that when we say things like, well, they had a good life, well, it depends on what we mean by that, because a lot of the things that are necessitated by just farming, not even just factory farming, are pretty cruel. Even on a lot of family farms, calves are often taken away from their mothers, which causes extreme emotional distress. Male chickens are often culled because they're not profitable. Cows and chickens, again, are still bred to produce abnormal amounts of milk and eggs, which is very stressful for them physically and psychologically. But even if they did have good lives, I don't think that would be a moral justification, because we wouldn't be morally justified in killing a child just if we gave them a good life first. And that's, I guess, finally the issue of like the apex predator thing, and the issue of dependence. Well, again, animals in the wild, apex predators, they don't have moral agency, and they need to kill in order to survive. We do have moral agency, and we don't need to kill animals to survive. So it's irrelevant if we're apex predators, or if we have the capability to kill other animals, or if other animals kill other animals. The question is, okay, is it justified to kill other animals when we don't have to? And that, I guess, seems to be the core of it for me. But yeah, so I guess that's all I had to say about what you said. But if there's anything that you want to focus on, I would be open to anything.
Yeah, this is my typical thing of speaking in huge chunks, and then poor Mouthy Infidel having to like write down and keep track of all the crap I'm saying. So I'll try to not do that as much. I'll just kind of respond to what you said. So the first thing I wanted to ask is, it's okay for animals to die so we can have civilization if it's roadkill, but it's not okay for animals to die because we need them for food. What's the moral difference?
Well, I would contend that we don't need them for food. Because we could eat food and, you know, be perfectly fine and not starve. So if we did need to kill animals in order to not starve, I mean, that would be one thing. But in a situation where us killing animals is purely for pleasure, purely for our taste buds, and there is no survival necessity of us killing them, I would say it's wrong to unnecessarily take a sentient life.
Okay, well, the problem with that is 60% of the world's land is not fit for agriculture, but it is fit for grazing animals. So right now, there's a big debate among, you know, all the people who want to institute veganism, because this is a pet project of the more like global elite. They do want to make this happen, but they're having trouble figuring out how. And that's when we get to things like you should eat the bugs, right? It's okay to eat the bugs because they're not as sentient, even though there are people who say that some insects are sentient. You shouldn't do that. You can't currently feed the world's population on like a totally plant-based diet as things are right now. So again, you'd still have to figure out some way to change the whole food production system. And if you were trying to monocrop everything, like my house has soybean fields on these sides and it has corn fields on these sides. There is corn and soy is all the Midwest is anymore. And it wasn't like that, 75 years ago. In fact, we hit a point in 1950 where we were almost out of land that had good topsoil, and we had to come up with new things like combines and tractors that spread manure. That's what they use all the dairy farm manure for. They spread it on the fields over and over all the time because the topsoil has been so depleted and raped. In the Midwest here, a lot of people get goiter and things like that because there's deficiency in the soil now. So it's not so easy to just say, well, we don't need to eat animal foods to survive. We can just eat plants. It's really not that simple. If we tried to switch it over right now, we wouldn't be able to feed everybody, which then you see a lot of vegans arguing for population control and depopulation so that we can do that, which that's kind of getting into a whole nother area. But the other thing I wanted to address, because I've heard other people say this before too, and again, I think this is it's a total myth that comes about from people who have not raised animals and aren't familiar with animal husbandry. So when you have a cow and she has a calf, and say you take the calf away because you want to use her milk or you want to make veal from the calf, it's not crying. I've heard this myth. It's not that she's crying because she's sad. What happens is the milk bag gets incredibly full and it's painful. The same thing happens to us human ladies when we don't have a baby latch on and we've been nursing and suddenly the baby is gone. You'll get so full that it's incredibly painful. So all you have to do is either milk the cow or reintroduce the calf and she's fine. So that's there's a lot of anthropomorphization of animals that have happened, especially your generation grew up watching Disney movies where animals have big human eyes, and Dumbo or Bambi get taken away from mommy and they're sad and they cry. And that's not exactly true. I mean, we could talk about what capacities these animals have, but cows do not cry because they're sad. They bay and make a lot of noise because they want to be milked. My cows would wake me up at dawn because they were pissed off because it hurt. They wanted to be milked. It wasn't because they were sad and missed their baby. So that's a big myth and a misunderstanding. And it's part of how the campaign for veganism has been sold to people, is to convince them that animals are just like people. They have souls and feelings and they bond and all this stuff. And it's not really true. For animals, it's more of an instinct. Lions don't take out gazelles because they hate them or because they're angry or because, whatever. It's instinct. It's pure instinct. Just like my dog, if I let my dog out in my backyard and she sees a rabbit, you can't stop her. She'll go after the rabbit and try and chase it until she catches it. It's not because she's hateful. It's not because she has emotions. It's pure instinct that she's operating off of. It's the same thing, like chickens are definitely not emotional creatures. They don't develop like attachments to one another. It's just not like that. If a couple of them die, the other ones don't they don't have a capacity to understand, like, oh my God, my friend Millie died today. I'm so sad and I'm going to cry. So we do have to, you asked me, like, what features do people have that makes them different than animals? Animals do not have souls, and especially according to like the Christian Bible, but even more on an objective level, they do not have the same capacity. They do not have the same, any of the same faculties. Even a very severely disabled person still has feelings and attachments and emotions and things like that that we know and can tell that they have that chickens don't have. And I think it's a very arbitrary line to draw to say it's okay to kill them because I want to have a car, but it's not okay to kill them if I want to use them for food and to survive and to thrive off of their nourishment. I think that's a very arbitrary line to draw. So I would love to see you kind of flesh that out more, because if you think that having a son who's severely mentally disabled is the same as, you know, killing him and eating him is the same as killing a chicken and eating it, well, then we got a lot of laws that we need to change. We have a lot of, you know, laws that we need to change saying that, you know, either you can kill and eat mentally disabled people or you can't ever like even swat a fly, because it could be the same thing as a severely mentally disabled child.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing that I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the ecological concerns, because you brought up things about land use and so on. And so there's a few, from my reading of the empirical literature, there's a few studies that I could reference. Obviously, I don't expect you to be able to like debunk them on the fly or something. This is more so just so the audience can look more into the issue. So there was one study done called Reducing Food's Environmental Impacts Through Producers and Consumers. And some notable findings were that animal agriculture uses 83% of all agricultural land, yet produces less than 2/5 of the protein we consume and less than 1/5 of the calories we consume. Raising animals for meat, dairy, and eggs is responsible for 14.5% of greenhouse gas emissions, meaning the emissions produced from animal agriculture is more than the combined exhaust of the transportation industry. Switching to a plant-based diet would also allow us to feed everyone on the planet, whilst also freeing up 75% of agriculture land, which is an area of land equivalent in size to the whole of Australia, China, the EU, and the US combined. Land which could then be reforested and restored, allowing us to sequester 16 years worth of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by the year of 2050. It's also, so another thing to note is that there was one study done called Food Systems in a Zero Deforestation World. Dietary change is more important than intensification of climate targets in 2050. And basically what it said is that out of 313 global food systems, the most sustainable diets were the plant-based diets, with the least sustainable diets being diets that favored meat and milk. And this applies to organic animal products and grass-fed, regenerative, holistically managed animal products as well, like the kinds of things that you were talking about. Another study I could reference noted that it's important to understand that local animal products are still not more sustainable than plant-based food, with it estimated that transport emissions for beef are about 0.5% of the total, and for lamb it's 2%, meaning that the biggest issue with food is the farming itself environmentally. The conclusion, I guess, of the first study I referenced, which I think this is worth noting, says, quote, "A vegan diet is probably the single biggest way to reduce your impact on planet Earth, not just greenhouse gases, but global acidification, eutrophication, land use, and water use. It is far bigger than cutting down on your flights and buying an electric car." So it seems to me that, well, based on all of the empirical literature that I've read, the best studies and meta-analyses seem to suggest that it would be more ecologically sustainable in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of land use, all these things, in addition to being more ethical to just not eat animals unnecessarily, not kill animals unnecessarily. You mentioned the thing about milk bags and how people will sort of, anthropomorphize animals. And it's certainly true that people engage in a lot of anthropomorphization of animals, but that doesn't entail that animals don't still have certain qualities, like having emotional attachments to their friends, having emotional attachments to their families. Certainly, we can see cows exhibiting these sorts of behaviors, even if the thing about them crying after being separated from their children isn't actually due to that. You also mentioned this thing about the relevant trait that makes it okay to kill animals, but not humans, being the fact that we have a souls, that the fact that they have a soul, and you said that we could even parse this out in purely secular terms, which I appreciate. So you mentioned things like capacity, faculties, disabled people even still have some level of mental faculties, some level of the ability to form emotional attachments that animals have, or more of one than what animals have. I'm not actually sure if this is true, right? So one thing that one video that I've seen, for example, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's called Raising Brie, right? And this is just one example. I mean, there are many examples I could find of human beings who seem to not exhibit any more rational or higher intelligence as opposed to your average cow or your average pig or your average chicken. If you have some evidence that there are no humans whose intelligence is lower or whose emotional intelligence is lower than that of any animals, I think that's a claim that I would be very skeptical of, and I have never seen any evidence of that. But if you have any evidence of that, I would be open to seeing it. You brought up this issue of sort of arbitrariness, like, why would we say that it's okay for animals to die as a product of roads, but it's not okay for animals to die as a product of eating them? And then you said, well, if we really treated humans the same as animals in this respect, we would have to change a lot of laws, right? So you're kind of implying that, like, oh, well, we would never say it's okay for a human to die due to a road or something like that. Or so why would we say that it's okay for animals to die for that purpose if there's no morally relevant distinction? Well, I would contend that we actually do say that it's okay for humans to die in order for roads to exist. Humans die all the time because roads exist. Humans get in car crashes. Children get hit by cars. So we have made that judgment as a society that, yes, the utility that we get from using roads is such that the deaths that occur as a result of roads existing are acceptable deaths. And so if we're going to say that that's acceptable for humans, I certainly don't see why I would say that it's all of a sudden not acceptable for animals, right? Because I'm not going to put animals on a higher plane than humans, where roads are good enough to justify human deaths, but not animal deaths. But what we would say, what I am pretty confident about, is just because we say that we get so much utility out of roads that therefore it's justified for some humans to die as a result of their existence, that doesn't mean that we therefore think that it's okay to go out and hunt humans just to eat them for pleasure. It certainly doesn't mean that we think it's okay to farm humans and raise them and give them decent lives just so that we can kill them and eat them, right? Because we recognize in the case of humans that these two things are, like, roads versus farming, these two things are very things morally. And so I don't see why we couldn't recognize the same thing for animals. And the same thing with swatting a fly, right? If the issue is there's a fly in your property, and so you kill the fly, right, in your house, would we say that the same thing is okay for humans? Well, yeah, of course we do. We say that if there's another human and they've broken into your house and they're messing with your house, then yeah, you can kill them. So that's already considered to be okay, generally speaking. I also want to note that I'm not saying that humans have the same moral status of animals. I think that humans in general have roughly a similar, or have human beings in general, like on average, have much greater intellectual capacities than animals, and so we have richer life experiences, and so killing a human is always going to be, or is usually going to be, worse than killing an animal. But just because I think human beings have more moral value than animals, that doesn't mean that I think that animals have so little moral value that it's okay to slaughter and eat them needlessly. Just because I, in the same way that I wouldn't say that it's okay to slaughter and eat a disabled person who has the same level of intelligence and emotional intelligence as your average pig, just because they don't have as rich a life experience as your average person. So yeah, I guess I did mention some of the ecological stuff, but if you wanted to focus on moral stuff, that would probably be less empirically.
We'll do that. I'll just I have, you and I are similar in our debate styles, is that both of us always come with lots of studies and things like that in case, like in our back pocket. So I do have a couple. I'll just read one quickly, but I don't want to get super tied down with that either, because a big part of the studies on this is that it depends who is doing them. So if corporations or governmental bodies or NGOs who want veganism, their studies tend to say, yeah, that's going to be the best thing. And then the entities that don't want it say, oh, no, it's going to be bad. So it's a little hard to objectively look at them. You can, but it takes, like Denise Minger is somebody who did like a teardown on the China study, and it took her like 6 months to go through that thing. It was a huge study, but the one I have here is from it's the U.S. Agriculture PNAS National Academy of Sciences from 2017, and I could screen share it, but we'll just skip that. It just says a study found that if the entire U.S. eliminated all animal products, greenhouse gas emissions would only be reduced by 2.6%. But this would result in more overall calories consumed, increased carbohydrates, and would lead to more nutritional deficiencies, including calcium, B12, vitamin A, EPA, DHA, and arachidonic acid. And in a country that already has a problem with obesity and diabetes and heart disease, the last thing we would want to do is increase calories by sacrificing nutrition. So that study says that would be bad. But what I wanted to say is, even though you think you're making somewhat of a secular argument, you're kind of making a religious argument, because the very first people who came up with the idea of vegetarianism or veganism, like the Pythagoreans and the Hindus and the Buddhists, India still has by far the largest population of vegetarians and vegans in the world. I think they're almost a third in India right now. They came up with that because based on their religious tradition, they believed that in the transmutation of souls, they believed that all living creatures had souls, and that when people died, they could possibly end up in an animal. So if you ate an animal, you could be eating a person's soul and not know it. That's kind of where that thought came from. Now, maybe that's not what you personally believe, but that's where this idea that animals and human beings are like basically the same, that we have the same life, that we have the same soul. That's kind of where that came from. And I totally disagree with that. I think most people intuitively know, even though we don't have like a study to prove that humans and animals are not the same. You'd be hard pressed to find a person who, if you said, okay, you can either chop off this chicken's head and eat it, or this baby's head and eat it. There's so many reasons. It's hard to even quantify why you wouldn't want to do one versus the other. But you're kind of saying, I think they're enough the same. Like they're not the same, but they're enough the same that we shouldn't do it because we don't need to. Well, you say we don't have to, right? You keep saying it's unnecessary, but what are you basing that on? What are you basing this idea on, that it's unnecessary to kill it?
So there's a couple things there. So what was your last question, just so I can write it down really quickly so I don't forget?
Yeah, sure. The last one was just, you say that we shouldn't kill animals because it's not necessary. We can just do as fine without animal foods as we can with them. What are you basing that on? Like, not nutritionally, but morally, like, why do we just not need to, and we can just eat plants and it'll be the same?
Yeah, so, hold on. Okay, so firstly, I wanted to note with regards to the study that you referenced. So, well, the first thing to note is that this study specifically was just talking about nutrition as opposed to necessarily the ecological impact. And in fact, it seems from reading the study that it says there'd be switching to a vegan diet would create a positive ecological impact. But in terms of the claims about nutrition, so you mentioned a couple of things. Firstly, you mentioned that it would mean an increase in calorie consumption, and you linked that to the problem of obesity. From my understanding of, just from what I know from actually going vegan, I think that, and also from reading the study right now, I think that might be a slight misinterpretation, because I think what it means is that you need to eat more vegan food in order to get the same amount of calories as you would on a plant-based food. But that doesn't necessarily mean like more obesity, right? What kinds of foods we're eating isn't necessarily going to entail that we necessarily have to consume more calories, right? Because it just comes down to, what we decide to eat. And vegan food is generally less calorically dense than non-vegan food. So you need more of it for the same amount of calories. If anything, I think that would decrease obesity, because if people are getting less calories from eating the same amount of food, spending the same amount of money, et cetera, then that is going to lead to people consuming less calories. And indeed, I think the data bears this out. I'm pretty sure that vegans on average have a lower body mass index as opposed to people who are...
If I could interrupt you at that one point, just so we don't lose it. I think you actually got it backwards. So, and this is something I know from years of doing bodybuilding and stuff like that, and arguing with vegan gains and some of these vegan bodybuilders. If you want to get the same amount of nutrients, so there's protein is the building blocks calories that your body is made of. Fat and carbohydrate are energy calories that your body converts to energy in one form or another. In order to get the same amount of protein, B12, and essential fats, you have to eat many more calories on a vegan diet than you would from meat. So say if I'm eating chicken breast and broccoli, the nutrition I'm getting from that, if you were trying to emulate that with like soy, corn, rice, you would have to eat a much larger volume of food, and you would have to eat a lot more carbohydrates with it to get that. There's female bodybuilders who do vegan diets, and they have to kind of go to great lengths to calculate that out and try to make that work to keep their body fat low enough and to keep their muscle mass high enough. And you can actually decrease body weight as a vegan, but you're generally losing muscle more than you're losing fat. You can lose collagen, you can lose bone density. So the lower body weight doesn't necessarily equate to lower body fat or better health. So I just wanted to, that's actually the part that I could sit here and do a 2-hour lecture on, is the nutrition part. But yeah, it's going to be, if we're talking about general population, if we made everyone go vegan and we stopped eating animals altogether, people would have to eat many more calories to get the same amounts of essential nutrients. Essential nutrients meaning the ones you need to live that you can't produce from your own body.
Yeah, well, so there are going to be certain things that you need to pay attention to in terms of your health. You need to, for example, so you mentioned things like, B12, bone density, which might be impacted by calcium. And certainly if you're going vegan, you need to pay attention to these things. You should be taking multivitamins. You should be taking B12. You should be taking vitamin D, making sure that you're getting enough protein, making sure that you're getting enough calcium, these sorts of things, right? So I'm not going to disagree there, but it seems like a well-planned vegan diet, at least according to sources like the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, can be just as healthy, if not more healthy, than, I guess, a non-vegan diet. But I also don't want to talk about the health too much. But I do wanted to say that with regards to, because I guess this originally started with us talking about ecological concerns, but specifically with reference to the ecological concerns, the study says specifically plant-based replacement diets can produce 20-fold and 2-fold more nutritionally similar food per cropland than beef and eggs. The most and least most and least resource-intensive animal categories, respectively. Although conventional and opportunity food losses are both targets for improvement, the high opportunity food losses highlight the large potential savings beyond conventionally defined food losses. And then it says, concurrently replacing all animal-based items in the U.S. with plant-based alternatives will add enough food to feed in full 350 million additional people, well above the expected benefits of eliminating all supply chain food waste. So it seems like, well, at least according to this study and then the studies that I cited, we would be able to produce much more nutritionally similar food, and we'd be able to feed much more people with much less land, and it would be much more ecologically sustainable if we had switched to a vegan diet. And also, one more thing to note just on with respect to the health, while it is true that there are certain things that give you specific health disadvantages when it comes to having a vegan diet, that doesn't mean that you can't work around those things and supplement if you supplement the right vitamins and so on. But there are also specific negative health detriments of a non-vegan diet, right? Like there's some evidence that things like red meat will increase your risk of things like heart disease and things like cancer, type 2 diabetes, strokes, prostate cancer, breast cancer, and and a vegan diet may even protect against cognitive decline, at least according to this study called The Impact of a Plant-Based Dietary Pattern on Dementia Risk, a prospective cohort study. So there are disadvantages and advantages to both of these things, right? And either way, we should be encouraging people to be more careful in terms of what they eat to make sure that they're healthy. But all in all, it seems to be the case that a vegan diet can be healthy, is more ecologically sustainable, and certainly is, in my opinion, more ethical than a non-vegan diet. But I guess that the ethical component is what I really wanted to talk about. And on that note, so you made this claim that I'm making sort of a quasi-religious argument. And it might be true that the position that I'm espousing was originally espoused by religious people, but I don't think that saying that is equivalent to the claim that the argument that I'm making in and of itself is itself a religious argument. I certainly don't think that in any of the premises of my argument so far, I've relied on any religious claims. So I think this would kind of fall under the category of what's considered to be a genetic fallacy, where you discount an argument on the basis of where that argument originated from, rather than on the basis of the virtues of the argument itself. Additionally, so I guess your main question for me was, why do you think it's not necessary to eat animals in the same way that it would be necessary to like have roads? Well, I think we can all agree that having roads, for example, is pretty necessary for society to function, right? So that's why we're okay with some humans dying in order so that we can have roads, because we get a lot of utility from them. And we could say that that's a necessary aspect of our society being able to function as it currently does. But I certainly don't think you could say the same thing about meat or eating animals, because I think that we can go on a vegan diet. And like I said, I don't think there's any significant health detriments that can't be worked around. I think it'll be good for the environment. There is no way in which us thriving or flourishing or society being able to function depends on us raising animals and slaughtering them and eating them and so on. The purpose of us eating animals at this point, the only purpose that it serves is our own taste buds. And certainly, mouth pleasure isn't sufficient justification for taking the life of a sentient creature who doesn't need to die. That's, I guess, my answer to that question.
Okay, so I could go through and debunk all the nutritional stuff, but we would really get bogged down in that, because that's, again, something that it should be a whole other debate. And I've done whole entire other debates on that. And the best minds in nutrition, like people who study nutrition for a living and have grants where they do studies, they design the study, they run the study, on both ends will sit there and have, like, there's been heated, crazy debates between these people, and they still disagree. So I don't think you and I are going to so we'll just kind of stick to the ethical part of that, even though I do disagree. I think that nutritionally, animal products are necessary, extremely beneficial. And I do think that what those studies prove is just that the way we're doing things now isn't good, which I don't disagree with. I don't think monocropping is good. I don't think that factory farming is good. I don't think that like the type of monocropping you would have to do to make veganism sustainable for the world population in order to grow enough soy and grains and all that sort of stuff, the amount of pesticides it would take, the amount of oil that it would take, because you need to run huge tractors and combines. I mean, again, this is something that I grew up doing. The amount of gas and oil that you need to use, if you're worried about greenhouse gases, that could definitely offset that. And those studies are based on a vegan food system versus what we have right now. And what we have right now already sucks. We should go back to rotational grazing. We should re-heal the grazing lands. Like the United States was mostly grazing lands and Great Plains with buffalo and ruminant animals roaming the plains and keeping the ecosystem going. That's what's supposed to be here in North America, and we've replaced it with all monocropping of corn and soy, and it's a terrible idea. It's not good for the economy, it's not good for health, it's not good for ecology, it's not good for any of that. So I would say to compare a vegan food system to that, it might edge it out a little bit, but if you compared a vegan food system to what I'm advocating, which is something like what the Savory Institute works on, which they have farmers across the world that work with them. They have a very complex way of doing rotational grazing and ethical farming that is not only sustainable, but it's actually going to replenish topsoil, which we've lost the vast majority of our topsoil in all of the areas of the world that are doing this monocropping agriculture, and we've lost the grasslands and the wetlands, and we could restore all of that and feed the whole world and have better nutrition. So I think it's more of a good, better, best thing that we're talking about there. But getting back to the ethics of it, so if what you're going off of is sentience, right? The ability to like experience things or have feelings or make emotional attachments, things like that. Again, you see the PETA billboards, right? Everybody's seen that PETA billboard where it's got like a dog and a cat and a cow and a pig and then like a duck and a chicken and a mouse or something, right? And it will draw the little line and it'll say, why do you eat these, pointing to the farm animals, but not these, pointing to like the domesticated pets like the cat and the dog. That's an arbitrary line. At least according to what you're saying. You're saying that, hey, I think all of these things are sentient and they shouldn't be eaten. Well, that would include things like fish. That would include things like rabbit. That would include, a lot of like chickens are extremely low intelligence. Chickens are like little robots. They don't, let me tell you from raising them, they're not with it. They don't all they know is follow the lady because she has the food that she spreads on the ground. They're not highly sentient. They're not like my dog. They're not like my cat. But that begs a question like, can you eat psychopaths? Because psychopaths don't have any of those things, right? They're there and they're talking to you and they can calculate, but they're not necessarily emotional beings or like empathetic beings or anything like that. I guess they're technically sentient, but I don't know. So would eating psychopaths be okay?
So can we eat? Sorry, I just had to write that down. There's I guess a few things that I wanted to address there. So firstly, you made this appeal to I guess both with regards to the ecological sustainability argument and the health argument. You made this appeal firstly to address the nutritional thing that, when we're saying that there are certain nutritional detriments to eating meat, that's just with regards to how we do things now. So, my issue with that is that may be true, right? The health detriments that we see as a product of eating meat might be able to be remedied, right? You could, have a diet where you're eating meat and be, perfectly healthy. But the problem is we almost have an instance of special pleading where you're allowed to say that when it comes to a meat-eating diet, but the problem is I could say the exact same thing with a vegan diet. When you bring up concerns about B12 and calcium, I can always just bring up the fact that, okay, well, that's if you do a vegan diet wrong in the same way that you can do a meat eating diet wrong. But if you do a vegan diet right, if you're supplementing B12, if you're supplementing vitamin D and iodine, and making sure that you get the right amount of calcium and protein, etc., it seems like we have reason to believe that you can be perfectly healthy. And this is, again, a conclusion which is backed up by authorities such as the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. With regards to the ecological sustainability argument, well, first of all, I don't even think it works to say in this instance that, well, the only reason we see these things is because that's how we do it now. So I referenced 2 studies earlier. The first one is called Reducing Food's Environmental Impacts Through Producers and Consumers. And this was a meta-analysis of 1,530 studies that looked not just at factory farming and so on, but looked at all systems of farming and analyzed 40,000 farms in over 100 countries and is regarded as the most comprehensive analysis ever conducted, exploring the relationship between farming and the environment. And the study concluded that a plant-based diet is the most sustainable diet, and the lead researcher said that a vegan diet is the biggest way to reduce your impact on planet Earth, not just greenhouse gases, but global acidification, eutrophication, land use, and water use. And that's even compared to the non-factory farming meat diets that you're talking about. And another study I referenced was called Food Systems in a Zero Deforestation World. Dietary Change is More Important Than Intensification for Climate Targets in 2050. And what this study said was, this study said that out of 313 global food systems, the most sustainable diets were the plant-based diets, with the least sustainable diets being diets that favored meat and milk. And this applies to organic animal products and grass-fed, holistically managed, and regenerative animal products as well. So even when we compare the ecological impact of veganism versus your sort of ideal meat diet, it seems like we are talking about, in your words, a good, better, best situation. But according to all the studies that I've engaged with, and even according to the study that you sent to me earlier, the best in this situation for the ecology seems to be a vegan diet. Also, you again bring up the sort of thing about anthropomorphizing animals, and I agree that that happens to some extent, but I can actually appeal to real research that backs up that animals have certain levels of emotional capacities that I think we should have certainly that we generally have concern for if exhibited in any other humans or animals. So, for example, one study from the University of Northampton has highlighted the human-like relationships among cattle. The research found that cattle have selective friendships and experience significantly less stress when they are hanging out with their best cow friends. So it does seem like, maybe it does seem like there is some level of emotional intelligence, specifically with cows. And there are studies showing that, pigs are about as intelligent as dogs as well. And certainly dogs have friends, can show compassion, can show love, can experience fear and happiness and all of this stuff as well. So I do think that the core feature that grants animals moral relevance, even if they're unintelligent, like chickens, is going to be sentience. Chickens may be unintelligent, they may be like robots in your view, but they still can experience pleasure and pain. They can still value their own experience, and in virtue of that fact,
how do you know that a chicken can value its own experience?
Yeah, so chickens have brains and central nervous systems, which researchers generally take to mean that they have sentience, that they can feel pain and pleasure. So they have some level of value.
Right, but they're not going to have like an existential crisis. They're not going to be like a chicken isn't sitting there going, but why do I have to lay eggs every day? What does it all mean? What is this for? What I mean?
but a severely mentally disabled.
It's reflexive and it's instinctive. It's not. You keep trying to say that it's valuable, and that's, like you said, it's totally subjective. How do we know that it's valuable? The chickens that I've raised don't seem like they're making any great emotional connections or like experiencing anything that you and I could quantify at all. So I feel like this whole debate. So you just did a ton of studies, even though you said you didn't want to do studies. You did a ton of nutritional stuff and ecology stuff, even though you said you kind of didn't want to do that either. And I kind of said I wasn't going to bring up all my studies because I don't want to get bogged down in them. And it does, to be honest, make for a very boring debate. So we should just get right to the heart of it here.
Yeah, sure.
If you think we shouldn't kill animals and it's wrong, all I've heard from you so far is, I just think it's bad. I just think it's mean. I just think the animals are cute and nice and we just don't have to kill them, so we just shouldn't kill them. And I think that for somebody like you, that's a pretty weak argument. And I'm wondering if there's anything more substantive other than, well, but they might be able to have like some level of like understanding that they're alive, or they might have some level of consciousness. But you can't delineate, okay, where do we draw the line, right? Is it, if it's not okay to kill chickens, is it okay to kill bugs? If it's okay to kill bugs, what about fish? You know, like you have to have something a little more concrete, right?
Yeah. So, so I guess I'll just, I guess, more directly assert the argument that I've sort of been trying to bring up in a roundabout way throughout this debate, which is all the qualities that you've appealed to. Because I asked you, you know, what quality is it that's true of animals that, if true of humans, would make it okay to do what we do to them? All of the qualities that you've brought up, we can certainly find humans with those qualities. So, for example, you bring up, oh, well, you know, chickens can't contemplate their own existence. They can't have existential crises. Certainly, there are severely disabled people who also can't do this. And certainly, we wouldn't say that it's okay to slaughter and eat them. So my problem is you've yet to provide me. So again, you kind of appealed to this idea that I'm just saying it feels bad to me, right? The quality that I gave that gives a being moral value is sentience. If you can experience pleasure and pain, then you should be morally valued, right? Now, if you want to say it's something other than that, wait, really quickly. So if you want to say it's something other than that, if you want to say it's emotional intelligence or IQ or the ability to have existential crises or any of these things, you're just going to have to bite the bullet on saying that it's okay to murder and eat a lot of disabled people.
No, I wouldn't have to do that at all. And here's why.
So then what's the trait that isn't true of any disabled people that is true of animals besides sentience?
So I don't completely accept that framing. You think there has to be a trait. I don't think there has to be a trait. I think it goes more like this. So when we have humans who are severely disabled, that's an edge case. And there are people still to this day and throughout history who have advocated that we should just kill them. We should kill the old. We should kill the infirm.
Would you argue that?
What's that?
But would you argue that?
I wouldn't. And let me tell you why. I wouldn't, because I do believe that human life is more valuable and more important than any other life on the planet, and that everything that is here for our purpose. Now, I realize that's my Christian worldview talking, but even people who aren't Christians believe that. The vast majority of people in the world believe that, because the vast majority of people in the world eat animals and don't see any moral problem with it. If only a small minority of people seem to see any problem with it, then like I said, it would be on you to say why that's wrong. It would be on you to say why everybody and the way that we've done things throughout all of human history is wrong. I mean, I don't think you would have made that argument 500 years ago, but I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think you're saying that now that we have technology and we can just make Beyond Meat burgers, which, by the way, read the ingredient list in that, read how those are manufactured, read about who invested in Beyond Meat. It's all the people you would think it is. It's the big meat companies. It's Tyson Foods is one of the main investors in Beyond Meat company. It's Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. So I think that if it was 500 years ago, you wouldn't be saying we shouldn't eat meat. You're saying that now that we live in a modern era and I live in a big city where I'm divorced from nature and I don't know how the cycle of life works, I haven't experienced it. So to me, it's gross, it's icky, it's scary, it's bad. Whereas if you grow up in like a tribal area or a rural area where you see every day animals eating other animals, animals eating plants. One of the reasons we need to eat animals, to bring that up, is plant food is mostly cellulose, all plant food. So like if you're going to eat grain or rice, soybeans, you have to separate the wheat from the chaff. You have to separate out the part we can eat, which is the starchy part, which is a teeny tiny part of the plant. The plant is 90% cellulose. Our stomachs can't break that down. We have no way to digest that. Only ruminant animals can digest that and turn it into protein, and then we eat the animals. So it's the cycle of life. The cow eats the grass, turns the grass into protein. We eat the cow, and then we make babies and we perpetuate our species, and the cycle goes around. The only time that I think that people think it's morally wrong to kill an animal is either if you're like the ancient Hindus who thought, well, my brother's soul could be in that cow because, you know, depending on how he lived his life, he might have been put into a chicken or a cow or a pig or something after he died, which, you know, we don't believe that here in the West anymore. But in the Eastern countries, they still think that. They still think that's totally plausible. The only other ethical argument, which is the one you're making, is that it's mean and unnecessary. You just don't have to, so therefore you just shouldn't. But what if I just want to? You still haven't said anything other than, well, it can feel stuff.
Well,
it can feel pain and it can feel pleasure. And it's like, well, plants respond. Plants respond to sunlight. It's been documented that if you talk to plants, they tend to grow more and they respond to things. And it's like, it's just still a very weak argument to me to say, well, you'd have to say we can kill people if you're saying it's okay to kill animals. And I'm saying people and animals are not the same. Human beings have souls. We are on a whole different level. We have this whole other quality to us as human beings, which have made us capable of building civilization, capable of language, capable of reading and writing. And just because a tiny percentage of people are born disabled, that doesn't wipe out that whole argument. That's an edge case. It does not represent all people, and it does not represent all animals. If we're looking at the general population of human beings, which are capable of thought and feeling and morality and all of the higher faculties that we have that let us speak languages, animals can't do that. Even primates, in the 70s, everybody thought, oh, we're going to be able to teach the primates how to speak and talk, and they still can't because that all got debunked too. So human beings are not animals. Animals are not the same as us. They're not as good as we are. They're not as valuable as we are in a moral sense. That doesn't justify animal abuse, but it certainly doesn't mean we can't be good stewards of nature, participate in the cycle of life, and be omnivores, because that's what we're designed to be. We're designed to be omnivores. We don't look at lions and tell them, although there are some crazy vegans, there's some crazy vegans who think we can rope off areas and put the tigers in there long enough that the tigers will learn to eat the grass. There's an ex-vegan named Lear Keith who wrote a whole book about that.
Well, okay, so my issue here is, first of all, with regards to the digestion stuff, again, I don't want to get too much into the health stuff, but I've not really seen any evidence of negative effects of vegan diets on gut microbacteria or digestion. In fact, the studies that I have seen, one of them is from 2019 called The Effects of Vegetarian and Vegan Diets on Gut Microbiota. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I saw you furiously Googling.
Yeah, so, no, I have a document with all the stuff. So according to that study, and then another study called The Health Advantage of a Vegan Diet, exploring the gut microbiota connection, it seems to be the case that there really is, there's in fact positive relationship between a plant-based diet and the development of a more diverse and stable microbial system that relates to digestion. But with regard to the moral thing, so with regard to, because I asked you to obviously name the trait, and you said, well, the first thing you said was, I reject the framing. I don't think there is a trait. But what we really have to understand here is that you can't really do that. So what I say when I'm talking about, trait, so imagine a trait equalization process, right? Imagine we have a human on the one hand and we have a pig on the other hand. And then imagine gradually, trait by trait, we switched every trait of the human to match that of the pig, right? First, we have me, then I have pig ears, then I have a pig tail, then I have a pig head, then I have pig level intelligence, and we just gradually shifted traits, right? At some point, if you're going to say that it's okay to eat pigs and kill them, but it's not okay to kill and eat humans, you're going to have to say that at some point in that trait equalization process, my moral value is lost. Because if you say that there is no trait, at which point my moral value is lost, then we have the situation where I've turned into a pig, I'm identical to a pig, and yet you think I have moral value. But that's just going to be a contradiction, because you've said that you don't think that pigs have moral value, or at least sufficient moral value to not kill and eat them.
Let me just clarify, because I don't think I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
If I turned you into a pig, but you were still you, is that what you're saying?
So, okay, well, just imagine we have like an average human and then a pig, and we switched every trait that's true of the human until it matched every trait that's true of the pig. So it had pig level intelligence, it had, all the physical features of a pig, etc. Right? At some point, you're going to have to say that even if the trait that you want to name is like the property of just being me, right? We could say that the trait is switched such that I no longer have the past of being me, and I've always been like a pig or something like this. But yeah, at some point, there's going to have to be some feature that humans have that animals don't. That if humans didn't, there's going to have to be some trait that animals have that humans don't. That if humans had, it would be okay to kill and eat them. And I just haven't heard a trait yet. And one thing you mentioned is the idea of, well, it's an edge case, right? And so, well, that could be a trait. So you could be saying like species normality. So like the trait is that you're part of a species that in general has certain capacities, right? Yeah. So I guess if that's the trait, then the kinds of bullets that you're going to have to bite would be, so imagine, for example, that something like 70% of humans were severely mentally disabled. And then we would have to say that it's now okay to go around killing and eating humans because they're not part of a species that in general has certain capacities.
That's what you're doing.
Well, it doesn't matter if it's going to happen.
Yeah, but it is a fallacy because it's
not a fallacy.
It is because you're saying, well, if we took reality and made it completely different than what it is, then would it be different? It's like, yeah, maybe then it would be different, but it's not.
So your answer would be, theoretically, if it were the case that most humans were severely disabled, it would be okay to eat them, but that's not going to happen.
I still wouldn't say that, no, but I'm saying...
Well, that's going to be a contradiction because the trait that you named was that we're part of a species which, in general, can have a certain level of intelligence and a certain level of an emotional intelligence. So if we imagined a scenario where most humans didn't have that, you would have to say it's okay to eat humans. If that is your trait.
There's no other creature on the planet that comes even close to humans as far as what we are and who we are, which is why Christians believe what we believe. And I know that people will reject my religious argument, but the truth is that there is nothing else on the planet Earth that has the ability to build entire civilizations, create languages, make music, create art. And I guess if we wanted to do that, if I wanted to take your tactic and turn it on you, I could say, well, yeah, okay, I guess when pigs can create a symphony and speak multiple languages and mourn for their dead, then I guess I won't kill and eat pigs. But until that, I guess if pigs could fly, I wouldn't eat pigs. But until pigs can fly, I'm going to eat the pigs.
Yeah, well, firstly, one thing that I just wanted to really quickly address before, I guess, answering that is the idea of, plants. And because it would be a problem on my worldview, it would be a genuine problem if plants were like, sentient. But it seems that they're not. It seems that plants have response to stimuli, but having response to stimuli isn't the same thing as sentience. So plants particularly don't have a brain and don't have a central nervous system, so they can't actually experience things like pain or pleasure. And even if I did say that plants had moral value, more plants need to be killed in order to have a meat-eating diet as opposed to a vegan diet.
Is that where you draw your line? I've been trying to get you to...
It's sentience. It's sentience. So
is it
the reason... The reason really quickly.
Sentient?
Are we sentient?
Bees are BEES.
So so whether or not insects in general are sentient is actually an open empirical question. I'm agnostic. I don't know. There's a variety of different properties that generally indicate sentience that scientists use to say, okay, well, if you have this property, then you're sentient. But it seems that plants don't really have any of them. But to get back to the issue that I have with your position, because you say like, well, why would you just arbitrarily pick the trait sentience? And the reason is this, right? Is because if you pick any other trait, so for example, let's take the traits that you picked. So you said that it's wrong to kill humans because humans in general can have a sophisticated intellectual capacity such that we can create civilizations, create language, create music, create art, right? Now, the bullet you're going to have to bite is, imagine we were in a situation, imagine our evolutionary process went differently or something like that, or I don't know if you believe in evolution, but imagine if human beings were in general, like 80% of human beings or something, were severely mentally retarded, severely mentally disabled, such that in general, our species did not have the capacity to create civilization or language or music or art. Now, what you're going to have to say is that if it were the case that most humans didn't have this intellectual capacity, if it were the case that most humans were disabled, that would justify, in this hypothetical world, going around and killing and eating humans for pleasure. But I don't think that most people would want to accept that conclusion.
Yeah, again, I'm going to have to, let me ask you how that is not a ridiculous argument. Even if it's technically correct, like even if you're like, well, it doesn't technically fall into this fallacy category or that fallacy category, but I think that it does. But even if it doesn't, do you think that's convincing? Like, really, that's the thing that convinced you to go vegan? So technically, if human beings were all disabled, it'd be the same thing. So therefore, that's a huge extrapolation. That's like a big jump to take mentally to say, well, if everyone was disabled, but they're not, that's right. We have to work off of reality to some extent. We have to talk about what the situation actually is. And the situation actually is that 99% of people have their mental faculties and can use language, at least to some degree. I have one daughter who was very late talking and is on the autism spectrum and started with sign language. She can speak now. And in fact, how we got her better and how we got her caught up with all her peers was specific dietary guidelines. And we had to remove grains and legumes and stuff like that from her diet. She appears to have a sensitivity to them. So she was, I'd say 90% meat-based until maybe the last year or two. Now she can eat a few more things. And she's perfectly normal and she's doing great. And she's far surpassed all the expectations. In fact, there was like a couple of blog posts that people wrote about her back in the day when we did this. But what I'm saying is, just because a few people have like severe abnormalities, you can't say, well, you're going to have to bite this bullet because if everyone or most people had those abnormalities, you wouldn't eat them. And it's like, well, I guess not. But if 70% of people had those abnormalities, we would not have the means with which to produce a vegan food system.
Well, so that's true, but I kind of take that to be a non sequitur, because the point of the hypothetical, right, is to say that, you can say that the hypothetical is not in line with the reality that we currently live in. And of course that's true, but the point of the that's the point of like a hypothetical, right? The point of the hypothetical is to say if your moral statement or your moral framework or principle is such that the reason that it's not okay to eat animals, or the trait that's true of humans, the trait that's true of animals, which if true of humans would make it okay to eat them, was the lack of the ability to form civilizations and all of these kinds of things, right? If you're going to say that that's the only thing that makes it wrong to eat humans, well, then the point of the hypothetical is just to say, okay, well, if we removed these, if we imagine a scenario where humans didn't have these properties, would it be okay to eat them? And if you're uncomfortable with saying that it would be okay to eat humans, even if they didn't have those traits, then clearly those traits aren't the determining traits that make you think it's wrong to kill humans, because you answered no, right? You said it wouldn't be okay to go around eating these mentally disabled humans. But that's just going to be a contradiction, because if you said the only trait that's true of humans, that's true of animals, that if true of humans was the lack of the ability to do this, then you would necessarily have to say, unless you were to contradict yourself, that if these traits weren't true of humans, that it would be okay to eat them. So clearly, if you're going to say that even if we remove these traits from humans, it would be wrong to eat them, then clearly you don't think that it is those traits that makes it wrong to eat humans. That's all I'm saying with the hypothetical.
Right.
And so you'd have to name a trait where...
That's correct, just because the thing that if you want to narrow it down to one trait, again, I think it's because human beings were created in the likeness and image of God, and animals were not. And if you want to go ahead and reject that, that's fine. But I think that veganism is part of a larger system of ethics that tries to replace God. The whole point of it is to try to come up with some kind of, and I don't know why an atheist and a moral relativist would even bother with trying to develop a system of ethics. I don't know why anything would matter. I mean, there's plenty of people who don't think it matters. There's plenty of people with your belief structure who don't think it's important at all. And one way I could demonstrate that I think human beings are different, that we have a soul, we have a nous, we have these special faculties that no other creature on this planet has. We have this innate ability to combine our rationing and our reason with emotion and creativity and things like that, so we can produce languages and symphonies. There is no other animal that can do that. And just because a few people are born with like a physical or a mental disability doesn't change that. And here's one way I could demonstrate. Do you think that it's moral? So chimpanzees are the closest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chimpanzees are generally considered the closest to us. They're able to demonstrate more of human traits than any other animal. So do you think that it's immoral when one chimpanzee bashes another one's head into a rock and eats its brains? Is that immoral?
I don't know that chimpanzees have moral agency. I don't.
Right, but we do, right?
Yeah, so we shouldn't base our morality around beings that don't have moral agency, like chimpanzees.
But I could take your same argument and say that since we do, that makes us different. It makes us, you could say we have a soul, right? You could say that we have an innate essence about us that is different from any other animal.
Right, but the difference there is going to have to be that, so I agree that we're different, right? So we generally have a moral agency that that animals don't have, which means that we should be expected to act in ways, on my view, that we should be expected to act in ways which animals don't, because we have that moral agency, right? But the bullet that I don't have to bite, that you would have to bite, is that if it were true that most humans didn't have moral agency or didn't have enough intelligence to have moral agency, you would have to say that if that's the only thing that makes it not okay to kill humans, you would have to say that it would be okay to kill humans in such a scenario, right? And I guess so with regards to the image of God thing, it's just going to come back to the same question, which is what trait is true of humans that if true of animals would make them made in the image of God, right? So it seems like all the...
Do you not accept my answer for that when I say, you know, chimpanzees can't do any of the things we can do, and they're the closest to us?
Well, I accept it, right? You could say that and be completely consistent, but that would entail that you would think it's okay to kill humans if we didn't have that intellectual capacity, and I don't think that would be okay.
But we do.
But if we didn't, you would have to say that that would be okay to kill them.
Okay, yeah. If we were animals like all the other animals, and we were not made in the likeness and image of God, and we were not, that's what makes us human. Right? What makes us human are those characteristics, are the fact that we can design cities, build railways, build rocket ships, create, you know, works of art, make hundreds of different languages, develop entire systems of morals and ethics, right?
Yeah.
That is what makes us different. So I guess you agree with me on that, but you think that that means we shouldn't eat the animals. And I'm saying that means we can eat the animals, as long as we are not being abusive or torturous, of course. But what you're saying is we can't eat the animals because we're special?
Yeah, so I guess I would be fine. I think that's kind of really all I wanted, right? So I would say that we've kind of reached that philosophical bedrock that I was talking about, where you could take a consistent position, and I can't say you're objectively wrong, but I can say that I wouldn't want to accept that. I'm pretty sure the vast majority of people wouldn't want to accept that. So it sounds like the answer would be that in a hypothetical situation, if the majority of humans were severely mentally disabled, it would be okay to kill and eat them for fun. I take that to be a reductio on your view. I think that's just sufficient proof that the consistent justification of killing animals leads to absurd results. So, I mean, I'm comfortable.
Yeah, so we're going to get to the Q&A. We have a lot of questions. So, okay, because this is super chat, I'm like forced to pull it up, but it's a troll question. So, Mouthy, do you think you got bullied in high school too much, just the right amount, or not enough? There's a correct answer.
Okay.
You don't have to answer that, because Neil's being a dick.
Okay.
All right, so let's get to the actual questions. All right, so I jotted them all down. I don't think I'm going to be able to pull a lot of them up since they're from a while ago. Okay, so from Black Hammer of God, how does a vegan maintain his gains from the gym? This is my main concern. Is that a troll question?
I don't know. That might be a question. If you want to, if you want that question, go DM'd. If you want that
gains, you better eat that protein.
Okay. From Jada Lee, can I order a veggie burger with a side of bacon, extra bacon, please? Okay, next question. From Reverend Coffin Son, this debate is an atomic loss for any vegan since, oh, there goes Todd, since humans are omnivores. That's not a question. Come on, you guys. From the Hammerite for Rachel, is it moral to eat dogs because our ancestors did it?
I would say that if you needed to, yes. I don't think it would be immoral, but I think that generally because we breed dogs to be companions and like workers, we don't choose to do that. I know that in Asia they do, and they have horrible dog festivals there, which me and most every other person is completely against, but it's more due to the completely inhumane and like they torture them, they skin them and they torture them first and everything else. But I don't think it would be immoral, like on a practical level, as far as like if you needed to eat a dog to survive. I would absolutely, as much as I love my dog, and you guys have probably seen me post pictures of her on Twitter, and she's my best friend. But if it was, I gotta kill her to feed my kids, that's what I would do. So.
Okay, so from Carl Fleury to Mouthy, plant agriculture kills more animals by sheer numbers than animal agriculture. Are you not simply arbitrarily choosing which animals you value as well?
Yeah, so the relevant question isn't whether producing plants kills more animals than producing, producing plants kills more animals than producing meat, right? That's not the relevant question. The relevant question would be whether or not we would be killing less animals if we switch to a plant-based diet. And that answer is obviously yes, right? Because while animals do die in the production of crops, that's true, we need to produce more crops and take up more land, which kills more animals if we're farming animals. If we only created crops and then ate them directly, we would have to produce less crops than if we were producing crops, feeding them to animals, and then eating the animals as we currently do, right? So the studies that I cited earlier specifically suggest that if we were to switch to a plant-based diet, our land use, the amount of land which we would need to produce the same amount of food, and therefore the amount of animals who would have to be killed by protecting that land would be substantially lower. So,
okay. Justin Lawrence says, does human taste good?
I've heard they taste like chicken.
Have you? Okay.
That's what I've heard.
From Dark Shadow Realm, groypers are cringe and brain dead, so we should be allowed to eat them.
Okay.
All right, so next question that is, I jotted down. From the Hammerite for both, is it okay to push agenda on TV to eat or not eat and eat meat? A lot of TV series do that, and usually they are pushing against veganism. Are there conspiracy against vegans? Jesus, this typed so bad, by the way. Do you want me to
I'd
read
say
that again?
there's probably not a conspiracy, but I think it's fine to push messages in TV as long as they're messages that I agree with.
Wait, was that person saying there's a conspiracy against veganism in television?
It looks like it.
So here's the reality. I don't think there's a conspiracy either way. I think that, so like one thing we mentioned earlier was like the fact that like like big investors are getting involved in vegan, right? And or like vegan food and Beyond Burger stuff. That's certainly true, right? All I take that to mean is that increasing numbers of people are becoming vegan, and so some rich people think, oh, it might be profitable to invest in this future industry. I don't know if there's necessarily an invested interest in people being vegan or not vegan. I just think that people are going to invest and performatively support whatever it'll be profitable for them to support. I mean, that's just kind of how capitalism is.
Okay. So
actually, if I could just chime in really quick and we'll get a little bit, we're going to have a little fun now that we're done with the first part there. There actually is and has been a conspiracy, if you will, to push veganism from the elites for over a century and from other groups that have an interest in this. So like I live not too far from where the Kellogg's cereal factories were first created. And breakfast cereal was made by like Seventh-day Adventists to try to help men stop masturbating, because they figured out that if you ate, grains instead of meat, this is something, again, that in Eastern religions they did to try to remain pious and chaste and and not have any like sexual urges or anything is to eat a non-meat diet. And it will do exactly that to men, and it will lower fertility rates in both males and females to do that. And if you go back and read like Lord Birkenhead, I don't know if anybody here has gotten that deep in conspiracy, but if you go back and read his paper written at the beginning of the 1900s, he said that we will have lab-grown meat. Now, this is in like, 1902 or something, 1920 maybe. We'll have lab-grown meat, and we're going to control the food supply, and we're going to get rid of everybody's ability to produce food for themselves. Because remember, back in 1920, most people did that. Most people homesteaded and things like that back then. And there was a push to eliminate that so that they could have global control of the food supply. And it's a very easy way to control people and do some social engineering. And we know they love their social engineering. That's very clear, and they don't try to hide it anymore. So that's why you see all the celebrities pushing vegan diets. You see Jay-Z and Beyonce out there pushing it last year. You see all kinds of them on the cover of all the girls' magazines. They're pushing it. So there is an agenda out there. There is definitely something to that.
Okay.
Well, yeah, sure. Okay, we can move on.
All right. So from Eric, but you can respond to whatever you want.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't want to like go on like too long because there's like a lot said, but I don't know if there's any meaningful way through which people being vegan makes it easier for the elites to control us. I mean, if we look at the meat industry, the vast majority of the meat industry is already controlled by a very tiny conglomerate of corporations, right? And so some of these corporations are now investing in veganism, but I don't think the most plausible explanation for why they're doing that is because they think it'll help them get better control. I think the most plausible explanation is there's an increasing number of people who are vegan, and so they think, oh, this is a future industry, and if I invest in it, it'll be profitable. Yeah, I'm not sure. So like the Kellogg's thing is true, I think, but I'm not sure if, I'm not sure if like some crazy kooky religious dude who is trying to get kids to stop masturbating is evidence of like some broader conspiracy of the elites to control the people or something.
Yeah, people always think there has to be like a handful of people that meet and like come up with this, and that's true to an extent. But it's more so your explanation is it's just money. They want money, right? Mm-hmm. Well, capitalism, if you read these people's white papers, the elites we're talking about, you read the Gates Foundation, the Tavistock Institute, any of these big NGOs, these not-for-profit foundations, if you read their white papers, which are internal documents explaining how they're going to do things and why, they say themselves that this is what they're going to do and this is why they're going to do it. Because if we want to have, for their plan and their vision they have, like the UN Agenda 2030, 2050, this is what they want. This is what they're foreseeing. And so that in the UK, they have legislation being proposed right now to eliminate any type of raising of animals in cages, including rabbits, chickens, anything you raise in a cage. They haven't passed it yet, but there's legislation coming through saying you can't raise animals in cages, that a lot of urban areas are getting rid of people being able to raise their own backyard chickens and things like that, and making raw milk illegal, stuff like that. They do believe that they need to have control of the food supply. They do believe they need to depopulate. And I'm not saying that as a conspiracy. I'm just saying I've read their own internal documents where they say this. That's all.
Yeah. So, I mean, the two things that I would just say would be, well, firstly, it doesn't seem obvious to me that having a vegan diet nationally would make it easier for the elites to control people's diets. If anything, I think it would make it harder. It's a lot easier for me to grow crops than it is for me to have a yard full of chickens and pigs. So
have you ever tried to grow crops?
I haven't. I've also never tried to grow pigs though.
Yeah. I've done both, and let me tell you, raising chickens, you don't have to do anything. You put them out in the yard and they eat the bugs out of the yard. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is, if it's cold where you are, put a little light in their little house at night. That's okay. Gardening is far more intensive, and you can't even do like I did. I had an organic garden for years. You can't even to try to do it without animal products like bone meal, blood meal, manure is almost impossible. You have to have animal products to even just grow your own vegetables in your yard.
Okay, well, I plead ignorance on that, but still, I don't know where specifically, in which papers the elites have said that they're pushing for a vegan diet because they want people to be more easily controllable. I guess I would just have to be shown where they said that. But I'll plead ignorance on the
for
crop
that
thing.
someday if anybody wants to get into the conspiracy behind all
right.
of the food stuff. But
Yeah, sure, we can discuss that.
All right. So from Eric Pone, for both, how do we encourage urban farming to bring our food closer to home?
should I go first?
Sure.
If you're in an area where you have any yard at all, you could go to your like city or your municipality and tell them that you want to be able to have a certain amount of chickens. If you're in an apartment building, some people can do some rooftop gardening and things like that, but it's never going to be enough to like totally sustain yourself. If you want to be self-sufficient, you're going to have to do some type of homesteading. And unfortunately, this is one thing that I will say. A lot of people talk about homesteading like it's so easy, bro. Just move to the country, bro. Just get like a farm, bro. It's not quite that easy. You do have to buy land. And once you buy the land, you have to get everything set up. So if it doesn't already have everything you need there, you're going to have to set that up. There's going to be an initial financial investment. There's going to be a huge learning curve. All the hippies that moved out to the country in the 60s and 70s, there was a big back to the land movement in the 60s and 70s. They all found out how hard that was, and 90% of them failed and it didn't work because it takes a lot of knowledge, which is why we need to support independent family farms and holistic farming, because they have the expertise to actually pull that off. Whereas most people who have to work a 9 to 5 are never going to be able to do that. I'm able to do it because my husband works the 9 to 5, and then me and all the kids are here, and we can like feed chickens and tend to the garden and raise goats and cows and things like that if we want to, because we have 5 acres of land and we have a pond, we have our own water and our own well and all that kind of stuff. But I would say a lot of urban areas have farmers markets now. A lot of states have programs where, like, if you're low income, you can get, like in Michigan, we have something called double up bucks, where if you're on SNAP or food assistance, you can basically double your food stamp money if you use it at a farmer's market. So that's a really great way to do it. Other than that,
and we got a lot of questions.
Sorry.
Mouthy, you want to respond to it?
Oh no, sorry. We can
move on. All right, moving on. Okay, so from Black Hammer of God to Mouthy, do you equate animal life with human life?
No, I think that in general humans are more morally valuable than animals. But I don't think that. So I can perfectly consistently say that human beings in general have more moral value than animals, while still saying that animals don't have sufficiently low value such that it's okay to unnecessarily take sentient lives for our own pleasure.
Okay. All right. So from unrelated coma to the vegan. You really need to drop the cannibal argument. It's not helping you. Do you know what a prion is? Normal humans feel revulsion over eating humans for a reason.
Yeah, so if the trait that you're going to name is that we feel revulsion, then if I could postulate a person who didn't feel revulsion against eating humans, presumably on the view of whoever wrote that message, it would be okay. It would be okay for me so long as I was born without revulsion to eating humans, to eat humans. But I don't think most people would want to say that that's morally justifiable, right? Because, just because I'm not repulsed by something doesn't mean it's not morally wrong to do it.
Okay. So from CD Socdem, for Mouthy, humans are omnivores. How is it not a naturalistic fallacy to claim that part of humans' existence has morality, good or bad?
Wait, I'm sorry. What was
the question? Want me to read it again? Okay.
Yeah.
It says, humans are omnivores. How is it not a naturalistic fallacy to claim that part of humans' existence has morality, good or bad?
I didn't. I don't know.
I don't know what
that
they're
claim.
saying.
I'm not sure what that claim
to be honest. Let's
is.
move on.
Yeah.
Okay, so from We Need Critical Thinking. What are the 2 people on the panel? Some documentaries they recommend, please. I'm guessing, okay. Another really well-written comment from We Need Critical Thinking. So I guess they want to know what documentaries you guys recommend.
I would definitely recommend Sacred Cow by Diana Rogers and Rob Wolf. That one is about this exact discussion and it makes a great case for basically what I was saying. Back in the day when I did these debates, I debunked things like forks over knives and a lot of the other there's a lot of very popular vegan propaganda documentaries that will show like factory farming and the horrific abuses in an attempt to like scare people into veganism. I would just caution you against those. It's definitely okay to say we don't want factory farming. It's okay to say I'm not going to buy factory farmed meat. I'm not going to buy it from the grocery store and like do what I do and buy it from your Amish neighbors, you know, even if you got to drive an hour. But there's a ton of factory or family farms now who you can find online. Just search like grass-fed beef near me or pasture-raised chicken near me. There's probably a farm within an hour of your house, and they probably even ship right to your door. So definitely watch Sacred Cow. It's also a book. It's a documentary and a book. Or you could go to Diana Rogers' website, Sustainable Dish, or you could go to Rob Wolf's website, robwolf.com.
Okay, Mouthy, you have any documentaries you recommend?
Any documentaries? Well, I mean, if you want to look at, if you want stuff on factory farming, I mean, you can always go and watch something like Dominion or something like Earthlings, which kind of shows secret or, I guess, undercover footage about what happens in factory farms. And yeah, I mean, it is pretty horrific shit. I still think it's not morally justifiable to eat animals, even if they weren't raised in factory farms, in the same way that even if we gave a child a good life, that doesn't make it okay to kill and eat that child. But I will say that if I can get you to stop eating from factory farms in virtue of having seen what they do on those farms, and instead eat innocent creatures who were killed but had a good life beforehand, I still would prefer that. So yeah, even if you don't buy
I
veganism.
have one more I forgot. If you want a really good YouTube channel, go to Primal Edge Health. Tristan Haggard's channel is fantastic. He's been on for years doing this stuff, and he's got some really, really great info. So Primal Edge Health.
Okay. And then Eric Pone says, groypers, grilled or bake. Oh, I'm hearing an echo. White wine or beer. I'm not sure. Is he talking about grilling or baking the groypers, or he could be asking the groypers? I don't know, but we'll move on. So from Earthman Brick for a base homeschool mom, there was a case of a lioness in her grief of losing a child that started adopting gazelles and nursing them. Dogs also mourn for their dead owners. So
yeah, dogs mourn for their dead owners because they were bred for the sole purpose of serving humans. So they don't have purpose if their human is gone. And then there's always edge cases like that where it's like, oh, this animal, it lost its young, so it adopted this other thing. That's instinct. That is not the same thing as human beings. If it's kind of funny that we even have to sit here and explain to people that humans are not animals and that animals are not humans. And a lot of the reason we have to sit here and explain this is, one, y'all have watched too many Disney movies with the cute animals with the big eyes who talk, right? I mean, that is in itself, to an extent, propaganda. Dumbo, Bambi, all the pet shows, all the little talking animal shows that kids watch. It's to anthropomorphize them. It's to give them human qualities and make you think they have human qualities. When if you were raised out in the country like me, around farm animals all the time, you would absolutely know and see in your everyday life that they're not the same. I love animals, totally love animals. My goats specifically, I love them. They're awesome.
But more questions. All right, we got another one for you, Rachel. All right, so from Gammy, how do you define souls, and why don't animals have them? Answer without citing religion to defend yourself.
I can't answer without citing religion to defend myself, because I believe that Christianity is true and that it's the truth. So I would be a heretic if I sat here and tried to say that that wasn't the reason. The best secular argument that I can give you is the same one that I gave Mouthy Infidel, which is that there are no other creatures like us on the planet Earth. There are no other creatures that are capable of having the deep philosophical conversation we're having right now. They're not capable of the creativity and the language and all of these other higher mental faculties, but those things, if you remove the morality from it, if you remove the religious element from it, then we are just really smart psychopathic predators. So I don't think you can remove Christianity from that answer.
Okay. So from Quibbles Over Coffee, for Mouthy, what trait would have? Oh, I got to make this bigger. I think I'm going blind, you guys. Okay. What trait would have to be the case of an American citizen before they were worthy of constitutional rights?
I don't even know what this question is supposed to be getting at. What trait does a citizen?
What trait would have to be the case of an American citizen before they were worthy of constitutional rights? I think they're.
I don't know if that's like a legal question or a moral question.
I'm guessing it's probably a moral question.
Yeah, so if by rights, if by constitutional rights you mean rights that are currently gifted to people under the Constitution, well then that's just going to be like a legal question, and I don't know the answer. But if your question is like, what trait has to be true of a being in order for that being to, in my opinion, deserve rights, then the trait would be sentience. So.
Okay.
Hey, we're going to give rights to everything that's sentient? So we're going to give fish rights? My cat has
rights not to be rights not to be killed, for example. Not necessarily like the right to religion or something.
Be killed, then why wouldn't you give them other rights? Like, why would you stop there?
Because animals have no need for certain rights, like right to free speech or right to religion. Obviously, animals don't talk or practice religion, so they don't need to be given those rights.
Do they have right to personal autonomy? Like, do they get to choose their habitat? Do they get to decide how many offspring they're going to have?
So we wouldn't give animals, we wouldn't give all animals like the same right to autonomy that like a person has, right? But we also wouldn't give full rights of autonomy. This is going to sound bad, but we also don't really give full autonomy to, for example, disabled people. If you're a severely disabled person, you don't get to pick where you live. You need to have caretakers. We acknowledge that.
That's right. That's right. And guess what? Cows and chickens can't survive if I don't raise them and feed them and provide them with shelter and water and everything else. No, they can't. Do you know what would happen if I just let my chickens out into the wild?
Well, that's because those chickens were selectively bred to live in farming conditions.
Regardless, here we are, right?
So but I'm not saying we should release all the animals that are currently in farms and release them into the wild, because that would be really fucked up to those animals, right? What we could do is, so for example, there are like animal sanctuaries, for example, where animals that were raised in farms that the farm decided for one reason or another, maybe that animal became injured, maybe the animal became sick or something. But if the farm decides, okay, well, these animals, we're no longer going to slaughter these animals, there are animal sanctuaries that those animals can go to. So presumably, as we made a gradual transition to veganism, we wouldn't just have to let out all of the animals that are currently in farms and let them into the wild, so they'll just be instantly ripped apart. They would cease
to exist, though. What you're saying is you want the gradual extinction of domesticated farm animals. Why? How is that more moral than killing them for food?
Do you think it would be more moral for us to... So imagine we have two possible worlds, right? In one possible world, we raise baby humans, give them good lives, and kill them and eat them at age 10. And then the other world, we don't do that. Presumably, if your moral principle is that so long as they have decent lives, it's okay for us to raise them for the sake of killing and eating them, you would have to say the same thing about humans. But I don't think we would want to say that.
You have yet to demonstrate to me how baby humans and animals are the same thing, unless you throw in the caveat that they're all retarded.
Yeah, so
all severely disabled to the point that they're so disabled that they just sit there and drool on themselves and can't even think.
Well, I didn't say that necessarily, but I haven't given you an argument for the premise that humans and animals are the exact same thing, because I wouldn't make that claim. I wouldn't make the claim that humans and animals are the same. The claim I would make is that the differences between humans and animals, there is no difference between humans and animals that justifies us killing animals, but not humans.
Well, then why aren't you advocating right now that we raise human babies for food instead of animals? Why not?
Because I wouldn't accept that for animals or humans. So I can be consistent and say, it would be wrong to do it to both baby humans and baby animals, right? But if you're going to say it's wrong to do it to baby animals because, beings that we give moral consideration, it's better that for them to live short but good lives as opposed to never being born, then you would have to, in order to be consistent, say that it's okay to raise and kill baby humans.
I still reject that, but I don't want to take up all the time.
Okay.
All right, so from Justin Lawrence, if an animal dies of natural causes, would it be okay to eat it?
I probably don't see a problem with that.
So we can just raise all the cows until they die of old age, and then it's okay to eat them.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that.
Okay. All right, so from Caesar's Seizures. Funny name. Okay, so would Mouthy Infidel rather eat an insect salad or a burger?
I would probably eat the insect salad. It would be grosser, but less immoral, I guess.
How long have you been a vegan for, Mouthy?
Honestly, only like over a month at this point, so not very long.
Okay.
I will be shocked if you're still vegan in a year.
All right, we can bet on it.
My best friend who's vegan, when she got pregnant with her baby, ate meat her whole pregnancy and fed the baby meat and everything, because when she looked at all the stuff, she was like, yeah, okay,
Well, like, what about being just maybe vegetarian or something? I mean, I feel like vegan is just so above and beyond.
That's true. We didn't address that.
Yeah, so for dairy, right, the problem with the dairy industry is going to be the cows that you get the milk from. Well, first of all, they're selectively bred to produce abnormal amounts of milk. Additionally, they have their calves taken away from them. They're forcefully inseminated. They have their calves taken away from them when their calves are born. And then they're milked for a while, and then at the end of their lives, they just get killed and turned into burgers anyways. So the dairy industry is kind of just the meat industry with extra steps. In terms of the egg industry, I mean, one of the first things that I could point out is that if you look at the egg industry, right, they specifically genetically breed female chickens in such a way that they can produce more eggs. And since the females are genetically modified, the male chicks that are produced by those chickens, I think, can't really be eaten. And because those male chicks also can't produce eggs, they have no, the egg industry can't be financially viable if they just took all the male chicks and raised them and allowed them to live. So basically what they do with the male chicks is as soon as they hatch, they check the sex. If the chick is a male, they throw it in a blender or a gas chamber. And, there's other things as well. But yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of messed up things happening in both those industries, I guess.
Okay, so from you, if you can't justify killing animals for food, how can you morally justify genociding them through eugenics in your utopia farm?
I don't understand what I've said that entails that I would morally justify genociding animals through eugenics.
I think he's referring to the fact that you want to generally phase out domesticated farm life eventually. So
if not raising sentient beings for the purpose of slaughtering them and eating them is, if not slaughtering and eating sentient beings is genociding them, then I'll bite the bullet. Okay, I'll say I support the genocide when we're defining genocide in terms of not killing living beings.
Okay, so from Kel to, why aren't vegans going to places around the world where they severely mistreat animals instead of America, where we have overall better standards than, for example, China?
Yeah, so I mean, you could make the argument that I should be exerting like more of an effort, to go around and help animals, right? But the difference between that and veganism is that in order to be a vegan, I don't have to really take any active action to help animals. I just have to not take an action that hurts animals. So I think it's like fundamentally more, you have more of a moral, so I'll put it this way, right? You have more of a moral obligation to not stab a child on the street than you do to go to Africa and feed and prevent children from being stabbed there. So I guess that's like the best analogy I could give.
All right, and last question from Runism from Mouthy. How do you justify taking supplements as part of a vegan diet? Doesn't that make it inefficient diet to a point where you need supplements to not die?
Well, you don't need supplements to not die, but you need supplements to be maximally healthy. But you should be taking supplements on a meat diet as well, right? Most, the majority of Americans, I'm pretty sure, or at least like high 40%, are vitamin B12 deficient, right? So you should be taking supplements regardless, in order to be maximally healthy. It's going to be the same thing for veganism. So
that's only because everybody's eating processed grains and trans fats and all the garbage filler that's in all the processed food. If you eat a natural whole foods diet, you can get much closer. There might be some instances where you might need a vitamin for a deficiency if, for example, your body can't convert certain nutrients or something like that. But generally, if you're eating a whole foods diet that's animal based, you can be extremely healthy and get everything you need.
yeah,
Go look at Tristan Haggard. He looks like an absolute alpha Chad beast of a man, and he just lives off of like his homestead in Ecuador. So
yeah, but I mean, so if you're gonna say like, well, we could imagine, so even though most people on the current meat diet are deficient in vitamin B12, we could imagine in a sort of ideal meat eating diet where you don't need supplements. I'm pretty sure I could say the same thing with veganism, right? If you ate all the right vegan foods, we're getting enough vitamin.
Deficient.
Not necessarily. And again, and even if that were true, even if you needed to take a vitamin B12 pill every day or something like that in order to be as healthy, I still think that small sacrifice is probably morally necessary if the alternative is like killing hundreds of sentient creatures unnecessarily.
Okay, so from Mio, Mouthy, you're saying if you could save all future chickens from future suffering just by killing, say, 6 million chickens, would you do it?
Okay.
All right, we're gonna so let's do closing statements and final thoughts, and then we are done. So, Rachel, why don't you go first?
Sure. So what we saw tonight was a very weak argument from Mouthy Infidel saying that basically we don't have to kill animals to survive, and if we have to sacrifice a bit of our health and our entire inherited human way of eating as omnivores to do that's acceptable to prevent the chickens or the fish or whatever arbitrary sentient animals from dying, then that's what we should do. It was not actually proven either way that we didn't get into enough studies or things like that to prove the nutrition or the ecology aspect. So I think that for the purposes of this debate, you could throw that out. But his moral argument was basically that you'd have to make 70% of people so severely disabled in order to justify his worldview that I think that's a big stretch. I think it's a huge leap. I don't think it would justify changing the entire food system for the whole entire world. And I don't think the benefits you get health-wise, morally, or ecologically from veganism would justify what you would have to do to change the system of the entire world. I think that from the beginning of time, we've been able to ethically use animals for food. There's tons of natives and Indians and other cultures around the world that use animal foods in a very responsible and ethical way, even giving thanks to the animal when it's killed. I know that here in Michigan, when we deer hunt, it's that kind of a thing. It's a very sacred thing. We honor the animal for what it does for us when we eat it. Homesteading and sustainably and holistically raising animals is perfectly moral to use them for food. There is nothing wrong with it. And I think that my opponent failed to make a very airtight case. I think it was based on kind of a hypothetical that's very extreme. And he's insisting that if I want to kill animals and eat them, then I have to be okay with killing disabled babies and eating them. And I think that don't be scared into veganism. I think that being connected to nature and to the land and to other animals and the cycle of life is very important for everyone. I think that because of the urbanization of our culture, we have lost that. We've lost the connection to our food, to where it comes from and what it does for us and our place in the world. And I think that that's super important. We didn't even get too much into how important that is, but I think that it is a very important moral and ethical thing to be involved in where your food comes from, your place in the food chain, your place in nature, and to understand and respect that is a far better and more rewarding thing for human beings to do as a whole than veganism, which is not good for you, which is pushed by top-down, globalists and things like that. So I would say eat the meat, eat the animals, be healthy, enjoy your life, and have a wonderful 4th of July and grill some burgers.
Yeah, so in terms of weak moral arguments, right? What we just heard was, well, it's morally justified because we currently do it, we used to do it, some cultures like to do it. All of these I would consider to be naturalistic fallacies. You're trying to cross the is-ought gap, and you can't do that. You can't say, because we currently do something, therefore we ought to do it. That's an actual fallacy. When it comes to the idea that, well, speaking of fallacies, right, this other assertion that, well, we shouldn't be vegan because being vegan is supported by, nefarious billionaires, right? Well, that's a genetic fallacy, right? You're saying that a position is wrong, not in virtue of anything inherent to the position, but in virtue of people who support that position, which is, you can't make that logical leap. Now, in terms of the claims about, I think I sufficiently presented my reason for believing stuff with regards to the empirical issues on ecology and health, so I can just leave that behind for a minute. But in terms of the moral argument, all the critique that I've heard is that you're using a hypothetical that's not real. And of course, hypotheticals aren't real, but that's why they're hypotheticals. That's the point of a hypothetical. The point of a hypothetical is to say that if you think that it is wrong to do something only for X reason, right? If I can present a hypothetical where X reason no longer exists, and you no longer think, and you still think it's wrong to kill them, then you've contradicted yourself. Now, you can be consistent, and you were consistent, because you said, even if, because you said, yeah, so if you remove the capacity of humans, if you made 70% of humans severely disabled, it would be okay to go around murdering and eating them. That's a consistent position, but I also think it's a nearly borderline psychotic one. And so I guess I could understand if you think that my argument is weak, if you see no problem with genociding a species of disabled humans, like if you just have no aversion to that thought, the thought of, running around and just slaughtering thousands of disabled people, if you don't have a problem with that, then yeah, my argument was weak. I couldn't do anything to convince you because we just have different moral preferences. But if you don't like the thought of killing disabled people, I hope I've sufficiently convinced you that in order to be consistent, you have to be vegan. And I think I'm pretty comfortable with that.
All right. Well, thank you guys both for coming on. The poll is up for both of our debates in our community section, so you guys can go vote. I know that they are, the polls really are just for fun at this point because people are messing with them and shit. So, but you guys can still go vote in the poll and leave some comments. What the fuck, Rachel? That's something with yours. I got to turn you on mute because something happened. Leave a comment with the reasoning, any constructive criticism you have for both of our debates. We are going to be off tomorrow, so I hope everybody has a good 4th of July. We will be back Monday. I'll get the schedule posted up. I'm going to post the Discord link one more time. Todd, you got anything before we go?
Yeah, let's just remember on this 4th to come together and shit on our former oppressors, the British, who we broke away from and claimed independence from. We're not Democrats or Republicans tomorrow. We are Americans. Let's remember that shit. Thanks a lot, everyone.
My dad is not going to be happy that you said that, by the way.
I'm sorry, Steve. Oh, I'm sorry, Pop. No, my bad. You're okay. You're one of the good ones. We're keeping you.
All right. Good night, guys.